Andy Borowitz seemed destined to become one of the biggest names in Hollywood, but he walked away from the glitz and glamour and is now merely one of the funniest people in America.
O.J. Simpson.
He does a little bit of stand-up.
Now, when we think of O.J. Simpson, we all think of the same thing, right? Author.
He writes humor books, but mostly he is the author of the Borowitz Report.
It's basically a news site. It's sort of, I do one fake news story a day.
As years go, 2010 has been target-rich for Borowitz's sharp satire. China, to stop spying on its people, will use Facebook instead. Hillary to become vice president. Biden named president of Afghanistan. Karzai traded to Minnesota Vikings. Christine O'Donnell favors separation of speech and thought.
Somali pirates say they are a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs. And one of them says, we were functioning as investment bankers, only every day was casual Friday.
Andy also writes for The New Yorker. Example, a drunk Emily Dickinson using her keys to scratch Ralph Waldo Emerson's car door with the words, "Waldo sucks." He's written about 40 pieces. This Andy Borowitz, you heard of him?
I have heard of him.
David Remnick is editor of The New Yorker.
I just know that if something absurd happens in the world, then I can reliably wake up the next morning, if not sooner, and Andy Borowitz will have hit it on the head. So when Sarah Palin signs a contract with Fox, the next morning I can read Andy Borowitz writing about how Sarah Palin will be simulcast in English. And it'll be a great piece.
52-year-old Andy Borowitz has always loved making people laugh, beginning at Shaker Heights High School in Cleveland.
I was kind of tall and awkward and gawky. I had a big nose. It's hard to imagine that now, but if you can just picture it, it doesn't lend itself to becoming the star of the football team. You wind up doing things like drama.
Were you popular within that crowd?
I was popular within the group of unpopular kids. I would say I was in the upper 10% of the unpopular kids in the school.
He was editor of the school newspaper.
The only thing that was interesting to me was the idea of making up the news.
He went on to Harvard, where he was, predictably, president of the Lampoon, the renowned college humor magazine. And then in 1980, only 2 weeks after graduating, Andy drove across the country to Hollywood.
I really never looked back. That was it. It was a career in comedy from that moment.
Archie Bunker's Place.
1 year later, he was writing for the sitcom Archie Bunker's Place and its lead, Carol O'Connor.
Carol O'Connor, who played him, was so powerful at CBS. He actually had the #1 parking spot on the CBS television city lot. The president of the network had the #2 spot. So that was my introduction to Hollywood.
Soon, Andy's lines were popping up on all kinds of shows, including The Facts of Life. Borowitz has a special affection for this series, and probably not why you think.
It was the worst television show ever produced.
It gets worse.
I was the worst writer on the worst TV show in history.
Much worse.
The only thing worse than being a whore is being a whore and totally sucking at it.
So naturally, in 1990, when NBC wanted to turn Will Smith into a star, it turned to Andy Borowitz.
And what's hilarious is I was 32 years old at the time and a white kid from Shaker Heights, Ohio. But in the universe of NBC, I probably had the most in common with Will Smith.
Now this is a story all about how my...
What Borowitz created and produced was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It ran for 6 years.
Come with me, Master William.
Yo, G, let me rap you for a second, man. All this Master William stuff, man, I'm not down with that, man. Make it sound like we back on the plantation somewhere. Like, Master William, Master William.
The hits continued, co-producing the movie Pleasantville, starring Reese Witherspoon.
We're supposed to be at home, David. We're supposed to be in color.
Okay.
Andy's star was ascending rapidly. But in 1995, Borowitz did the utterly unthinkable. He quit Hollywood and moved to a New York City suburb.
You went to Hollywood and you were wildly successful. Why would you walk away from something like that?
Well, you know, there's this concept called the hedonic treadmill. And what that means is that if you go and you do a hit TV show, then the treadmill suggested to be happier, you then have to do another hit, and it's got to be bigger. And then you have to get a bigger house and, you know, a better dog. And I realized, you know, if I looked at my life in the 90s, I was enormously successful, but not terribly happy.
Today, he is content. He lives in Manhattan with his second wife, writer Olivia Gentile. They had a baby in January. When he feels like it, he writes. He performs.
And this brings me to Elliot Spitzer.
Whatever. It sounds like a Hollywood ending only Borowitz would write. And funny, there's no punchline.
I think that's everyone's worst fear in Hollywood, is that they're going to become a forgotten person. And my feeling was, you know what, I'd like to kind of disappear for a couple of years. I'd like to do nothing and maybe just read and sort of think about things and then see where I am at the end of that. And so that's exactly what I did. And maybe that was crazy. I don't know.
Gutsy, I think.
Well, thank you, Harry.